The water was black, not dark, black. The kind of darkness that swallows light whole and gives nothing back. Robert McLeod had been diving for 17 years, but he'd never felt water like this. It pressed against him, cold and thick, like something alive. His headlamp cut through maybe 3 feet of visibility before the murk devoured it completely. He checked his dive computer. 72 feet, still descending. That's when his radio crackled. His partner's voice, distorted and faint. "Rob, you're drifting. Rob, can you—" Static. Then silence. Not the silence of a dead radio. The silence of being completely, utterly alone. When Robert surfaced 3 minutes later, he was 200 meters from where he'd gone down. His equipment was functioning perfectly. His air consumption was normal. But he had no memory of those 3 minutes. None at all. Except for one thing. The thing he saw, looking back at him from the dark. On September 14th, 2019, a seasoned commercial diver experienced something in Loch Ness that defies explanation. His name is Robert McLeod, a 43-year-old underwater engineer from Inverness with nearly 2 decades of experience in deep-water operations. He'd worked on oil rigs in the North Sea, salvage operations off the Scottish coast, and countless murky freshwater dives. He was not the kind of man who spooked easily. The dive took place in Urquhart Bay, one of the deepest and most notorious sections of Loch Ness, sitting at a maximum depth of around 755 feet. Robert and his dive partner, Graham Finch, were conducting a routine survey for a documentary crew studying underwater geology. The plan was simple. Descend to 80 feet, take sonar readings, document the lakebed structure, and surface. But at 4:47 p.m. Robert's radio went silent, and when he reappeared, he wasn't the same. What makes this case different from the hundreds of Loch Ness stories is this. Robert McLeod didn't see the monster. He didn't capture blurry footage or make wild claims. What he described was far more disturbing, and it's haunted him ever since. The afternoon sky over Loch Ness was bruised with low clouds, the kind that turn the water steel grey and swallow the surrounding hills in mist. Robert and Graham arrived at Urquhart Bay just after 3 p.m. The wind was light, the surface calm, ideal conditions, though Robert would later say the water felt wrong from the moment he looked at it. It was too still, he recalled in an interview 6 months later, like it was waiting. By 4:30 p.m., both divers were suited up. Robert performed his checks twice: regulator, buoyancy compensator, dive computer, headlamp, radio. Everything nominal. Graham gave him the thumbs up from the support boat. The documentary crew's sonar operator was already scanning the lakebed below, mapping the terrain. Robert rolled backward into the water. The cold hit him immediately, even through his 7mm wetsuit. Loch Ness stays between 5 and 7 degrees Celsius year-round, fed by deep underground springs. But this felt colder, heavier. He equalized his ears and began his descent, the pale light from the surface fading within seconds. At 20 feet, the water turned brown. At 40, it turned black. His headlamp became almost useless. The water was thick with peat particles, tannins leaching from decayed vegetation that gave Loch Ness its infamous murk. Visibility dropped to less than 3 feet. Robert had dived in worse, but something about this felt different. The beam of his light didn't diffuse, it just stopped, like the water was absorbing it. His radio crackled. "Rob, you're at 60 feet. Sonar's showing a shelf drop-off about 15 meters ahead. Watch your buoyancy." Copy," Robert replied. He checked his compass. He was drifting slightly west, pushed by a mild current he hadn't felt near the surface. He adjusted, finning gently, keeping his breathing slow and controlled. His bubbles rose in silver chains, vanishing into the dark above. 70 feet. The cold was seeping through now, into his fingers, his jaw. He flexed his hands, checked his gauges. Air. Good. Time. 12 minutes elapsed. He should be nearing the target depth. That's when he heard it. A low, resonant sound. Not mechanical, not organic, somewhere in between. It vibrated through the water, through his chest, through his bones, like a hum or a groan. Robert froze. The sound faded, replaced by the rhythmic hiss of his regulator and the faint ticking of his dive computer. "Graham, you copy?" he said into the radio. "Static." "Graham?" More static, then a brief crackle, and Graham's voice came through, distorted and broken. "Rob, drifting. Can you—" Then nothing. Robert looked at his compass. The needle was spinning, slowly at first, then faster, like it couldn't find north. His dive computer flickered. The depth reading jumped from 72 feet to 110, then back to 68, then to 95. That's impossible. His headlamp dimmed. And then, from somewhere below him, he saw it. Not a shape, not a creature. A light, faint, pale green, moving. It rose toward him slowly, undulating like something swimming. But it wasn't a beam. It was diffuse, bioluminescent, pulsing softly in rhythm with that deep, resonant hum that had returned, louder now, surrounding him. Robert's training kicked in. He checked his air. Still good. He checked his depth. The computer had stabilized at 74 feet. He should ascend. He should abort the dive. But he couldn't move. Not because he was frozen in fear. Because he physically could not move. His body felt locked in place, suspended in the water as if held by invisible hands. His breathing quickened, his heart hammered. He tried to kick, tried to inflate his BC, but his muscles wouldn't respond. The light rose closer, and then he saw the eye. Not an eye like a fish, not like any animal he'd ever seen. It was massive, easily the size of a dinner plate, and it reflected his headlamp with an unnatural golden sheen. The pupil was vertical, slitted, but the iris looked almost human, intelligent. It blinked, and Robert's vision went white. When Robert McLeod surfaced, it was 4:50 p.m. 3 minutes had passed since his radio went silent. Graham was already shouting, hauling him toward the boat. The documentary crew was on their feet, panic in their voices. Robert's regulator was still in his mouth, his equipment still functioning, but his eyes were wide, unfocused, and he was hyperventilating. They pulled him aboard. His body was shaking, not from cold, but from shock. His core temperature had barely dropped. His air consumption was normal. There was no sign of nitrogen narcosis, no equipment failure, no reason for what had just happened. But Robert couldn't speak. For 20 minutes, he sat on the deck, wrapped in a thermal blanket, staring at the water. When he finally found his voice, all he said was, "It saw me." In the weeks that followed, Robert underwent medical evaluation, psychological assessment, and even hypnotherapy to try to recover the missing 3 minutes. What he remembered came in fragments, flashes, impressions rather than clear memories. He remembers the eye. He remembers the light fading. He remembers feeling pulled, not dragged but drawn, as if the water itself was moving him. He remembers descending deeper, though his equipment shows he never went below 75 feet. And he remembers the cold, not the cold of the water, a different cold, the kind that comes from inside, from something old, something that had been waiting in the dark for a very, very long time. When he finally resurfaced, Graham said Robert appeared 200 meters south of where he'd descended, in open water, far from the dive site. The sonar operator said something large had appeared on their screen during those 3 minutes, something that moved beneath Robert, slowly, before descending back into the depths and vanishing off their instruments. Robert never dived Loch Ness again, and he never spoke about what happened during those 3 minutes, only what he felt. "It wasn't hunting me," he said quietly, months later. "It was curious." Robert McLeod's experience isn't the first time a diver has reported strange phenomena in Loch Ness, but it's one of the most credible and well documented. In 1976, a team from the Academy of Applied Science deployed underwater cameras and sonar equipment in Urquhart Bay. One image, known as the Rhines photograph, appears to show a large diamond-shaped flipper. While debated and disputed, sonar contacts during that expedition detected objects over 20 feet long, moving at depths exceeding 500 feet. In 2016, a Norwegian diving team exploring the loch reported equipment malfunctions, compass anomalies, and what they described as pressure waves moving through the water with no visible source. Local legends speak of natwilm, underwater tunnels or caves that connect Loch Ness to the sea or to other lochs. Geological surveys have found submerged fault lines and deep fissures, though none proven to connect externally. Some theorize these could create underwater currents, acoustical anomalies, or even undiscovered ecosystems. There have also been reports of bioluminescent phenomena in deep freshwater lakes, rare but documented. Certain species of deep-dwelling fish and microorganisms can emit light, but none native to Scotland match what Robert described. And then there's the hum. In 2003, hydrophones placed in the loch by a research team from the University of Edinburgh recorded low-frequency sounds that couldn't be identified. Too deep for fish, too regular for geological activity. The recordings were never explained. So what really happened to Robert McLeod? Let's consider the possibilities. Theory 1. Nitrogen narcosis or hypoxia. At 74 feet, nitrogen narcosis is unlikely but not impossible, especially in cold water. However, Robert's air mix was standard, his ascent was controlled, and he showed no symptoms post-dive. Medical evaluations found no hypoxia, no elevated CO2, no signs of contaminated air. His dive partner experienced no issues. Theory 2. Equipment malfunction. Robert's gear was inspected immediately after the dive. Everything functioned normally. His computer logged the entire dive with no gaps. His compass malfunction could suggest a magnetic anomaly. Loch Ness sits atop a geological fault line, which could theoretically create localized magnetic disturbances, but this doesn't explain the lost time or his displacement. Theory 3. Psychological episode. Dissociation, panic, or a brief psychotic episode could explain memory loss. But Robert was an experienced diver with no prior mental health issues. And it doesn't explain the sonar contact, the equipment anomalies, or his physical displacement. Theory 4. An encounter. If we take Robert's account at face value, he encountered something large, intelligent, and possibly bioluminescent. Could it be an unknown species, a deep-dwelling eel, a surviving plesiosaur, or something else entirely? The problem is evidence. Robert has his testimony, the sonar blip, and his trauma. That's it. But here's what makes his case compelling. He's consistent. He's credible. And he's terrified, not of what he saw, but of what it wanted. 3 weeks after the dive, Robert received a package at his home. No return address, postmarked from Inverness. Inside was a single waterproof SD card. He plugged it into his computer. It contained one file, a video, timestamp September 14, 2019, 4:48 p.m. It was footage from his helmet camera, the camera he hadn't been wearing that day. The video shows blackness, murky water, and then something moving in the frame. Large, slow, the outline of something massive just beyond the light. And at the very end, for less than a second, the eye, staring directly at the lens. Robert deleted the file immediately, but he kept the SD card, because 3 months later, another diver went missing in Urquhart Bay, and when they found him, he was holding the same card.